Okay. Part 6. Hersher's Special Accommodations, a short story that takes place between Part 3, Volume 5, and Part 4, Volume 1, originally written as a sales bonus for the latter. Hersher receives a special request from Ehrenfest, which brings to mind thoughts of her duchy and her disciple. Authors know how was Rosamund's long slumber seen by those not in Ehrenfest. In this chapter, I decided to write a little about what dormitory supervisors do when they're not, supervising their dormitories. I hope you enjoy seeing a side of Hersher that Rosamund doesn't experience as a student. In preparation for my most recent brew, I set down my practice wooden board, the surface of which was all rough and dented from extensive use. On it was a magic circle that would aid my brewing, but in order to actually use it, I needed to transfer the design onto paper. I checked the magic circle for any errors. I already had it memorized, but better safe than sorry, then held down my sheet of paper with my left thumb and index finger. Then after deciding how big I wanted to make my copies, I morphed my staff into a pen and took a slow breath. My every line would need to be beautiful and precise. My focus entirely on the pen, I drew several circles of various sizes, one after another. My movements were quick but delicate. I seemed to be on a roll today. My concentration was perfect, and my pen moved with a tremendous accuracy. It was probably because I was in such good health at the moment. My mana flowed smoothly, and the lines I drew were of equal thickness, making my circle even more seamlessly than expected. I set down my pen and paused to appreciate my work, but not for long enough that my focus would wane. After rotating my wrist a few times and rolling my shoulder to loosen up, I got to work drawing the sigils next. All of a sudden, a flapping noise announced the arrival of an ordnance. This wasn't the best time, considering that my arm was occupied and I could not serve as a perch. I completed the sigil that I was working on, tapped the desk to make the little nuisance land, then resumed my drawing. Professor Hersher, the bird said, we need you to unlock the Ehrenfest dormitory. It was a message from one of the knights working in the dormitory's teleportation hall. I will soon, I replied, not even looking up for my magic circle. Wait for now. I was preoccupied at the moment, so I would send the ordnance back later. The Archduke conference arrived in the blink of an eye. It was about... Sorry. It was about now that attendants would start arriving from the castle to begin preparing the dormitory. I was fortunate enough to not to be teaching any remedial lessons this year, so I'd pay almost no attention to the changing of the seasons, but this meant that spring was almost over. How wonderful it has been not having to tutor Angelica. Words cannot describe how great it feels to be so immersed in my research. But alas, I soon received another ordinance. Professor Hersher, where are you? We request that the dormitory be unlocked. Truly a foolish question. I was obviously in my laboratory in the Scholar Building. And because you haven't shown up, that's why they're asking. Duh! And surely they understood that my lack of a response meant that I was brewing, or could they not even piece together that much? Good grief, I sighed again, ignoring the ordinance to focus on my drawing. It seems to me that the knights stationed in the teleportation hall need more training. Yes, it was my duty as a dormitory supervisor to unlock the dormitory and tea party room, but my intervention was not necessary for the servants to prepare chefs or the attendants to clean the room for the archducal couple. My mana was in top form right now, and I intended to finish the magic circle and complete my brewing while that remained true. I gazed upon my magic circle with a contented sigh, impressed with my accomplishment, only for yet another ordinance to arrive. This is Norbert Hersher. I ask that you unlock a dormitory and tea party room without further delay. So the castle's head attendant had decided to join the tomfoolery. One can easily imagine his furious countenance. I was going to start brewing right away, but I sensed that making them wait any longer would only cause any more trouble. Yeah! Though it pains me to admit, this is the bare minimum I must do as a dormitory supervisor. I suppose I shall accept. After heaving a very drawn-out sigh, I stood up. Then after one last regretful glance at my magic circle, I went into my laboratory's hidden room and acquired my key ring. I shall unlock the doors to the central building and the tea party room, and that is all, I told myself. It won't be long before I'm back in my laboratory and immersed in research. A meeting with Norbert would surely lead to a bothersome lecture of sorts, so I was prepared to leave the moment my work was done. I inserted my key into the door the moment I arrived at the dormitory and started pouring my mana into it. And no sooner had the door unlocked than it opened from the other side. Pray tell, Hersher, where were your responses to our ordinances? Norbert asked, wearing a smile that did not reach his eyes in the least. Uh-oh, he's pissed off. He was dressed in the sharp attire of an archduke's head attendant, and his hair, which was more gray than brown these days, was smartly slicked back with gel. I certainly hadn't expected Norbert to be listening for my arrival, but I managed to hide my surprise behind a smile. Oh my, good day to you, uncle. Uncle? Is that her uncle? Really? Did not expect that. If you'll excuse me, I must go unlock the tea party room as well. I tried to close the door again and make my escape, but he stopped me in my tracks. I am glad to see you in such good health this year, but can you do nothing about that outfit of yours? You are a professor of the Royal Academy and a noblewoman above all else. I knew this would happen, but this is precisely why I was trying to avoid him. A small voice in my head told me I could have sidestepped this mess by responding to the knight's first ordinance. Yeah, you could have. But I silenced it at once. Ah, dear me, I said. Should my appearance come as any surprise when I was so abruptly dragged away from my research? I put down my very important work because someone made this seem urgent, and I will continue that work immediately upon returning to my laboratory. Changing clothes would have been a waste of time, since I would have needed to change back to continue brewing. Yeah, I kinda understand that, but you should have just gone and done the first ordinance, and then you wouldn't have had any trouble. Maybe. Norbert's brow furrowed a little, and his purple eyes narrowed in a glare. Just how much time do you believe has passed since that first ordinance was sent? You had more than enough time to make yourself presentable, did you not? Unfortunately, I spent all of that time trying to find an appropriate stopping point in my work. If you required me to dress up, then I would ask that you arrange a formal meeting instead of summoning me by ordinance at such short notice. I would be more than willing to accommodate your wishes then. No matter how deeply I was absorbed in my work, I was fully capable of changing my clothes if given 3 or 4 days' notice. That much notice? After all, my attendant would outright forbid me from doing research on the day I was needed. If you do not wish to see me in these clothes, dear uncle, then allow me to lock the door again so that we might arrange a meeting. I am sure we can arrange for my return before the Archducal family arrives. I'm guessing they're already there. I was ready to close the door and put an end to this lecture, but Norbert moved to stop me. Just go and unlock the tea party room. Oh, and Herscher. Dormitory supervisors are supposed to live in their respective dormitory. Is it not about time that you return? How painfully ironic. It was at Norbert's request that I moved to the laboratory in the first place. He had told me that Lady Veronica's mood soured each time she saw me in the dormitory during the Archduke conference. Now here he was, demanding that I come back, because, at that point, Veronica's gone. She's not in power anymore. I cocked my head to one side and smiled provocatively. My apologies, dear uncle. I have lived away from the dormitory for so long that I do not know how to return. Norbert paused for a moment and then said, Lord Sylvester's children will be enrolled in the Royal Academy next winter. We would like the dormitory to have its supervisor back before then. Lord Sylvester's children? If my memory served me right, Lord Sylvester's first son had been raised by Lady Veronica herself and was yet said to become the next Archduke. My cheek twitched. The troubles we had all faced during Lord Sylvester's time at the Royal Academy were sure to resurface. Dear uncle, I said, if this is not a request from Ob Ehrenfest himself, then I must decline even you. Now I must go unlock the tea party room. And with that, I took my leave. A small part of me thought I heard someone say, our discussion is not yet over, but I elected to believe it was my imagination. No, they did. They said it. They said that. If my return to the dormitory really is important, he'd surely come after me. At a leisurely pace, I made my way to the tea party room. Ehrenfest's door was number 14. Though we may end up climbing a rank this year. The duchy's younger students were obtaining higher grades than expected, to the point that some of the other professors had even started to comment on their achievements. One could assume they were working their hardest in hopes of being chosen to serve the Archduke candidates coming to the Royal Academy. I unlocked the door, and lo and behold, there was Norbert. He got there first. Send word when the Archduke conference is over, I said to him. Turning to leave, I will come and lock any doors you wish. Herscher, this does not conclude your duties for this year's Archduke conference. There are other things I must ask you to do as Ehrenfest's dormitory supervisor. I paused. It was clear from his decision to come here that this conversation really was important, but to my knowledge, there was nothing else for me to do. And what might those be, I asked. We need special accommodations to be made for Lady Rosemine, one of the enrolling Archduke candidates. This box here contains a letter from Ob Ehrenfest and documents from her primary doctor. Take them. I think you will find them necessary. Lady Rosemine? The fabled saint? Several years ago, some amused professors had consulted me about her. Hartman continues to mention a saint being baptized in Ehrenfest. Oh god, of course it's Hartman doing it. Of course! It couldn't have been anyone else. One had said. Another had then asked me to comment on gossip of a new daughter loved dearly by the gods. Of course, the saint rumors were too foolish for anyone to actually believe, but nobody could deny that she had been baptized as Lord Karlstadt and Lady Elvira's daughter before being adopted by the Archduke. This meant she was also Cornelius' little sister. I'm impressed that a girl in her position was adopted at all. It seems infinitely unlikely that Lady Veronica would ever grant her permission. Perhaps he is Lord Sylvester's newest sacrifice so that he can remain Ob? Huh? I was well aware of my bias against Lord Sylvester, but I simply could not bring myself to like him. There had been a time when Ferdinand and I hoped that his becoming Archduke would curtail Lady Veronica's tyranny and bring change to Ehrenfest. But in the end, everything had stayed the same. Oh, once you read those messages from Ferdinand, I think you'll change your tune on this one. I returned to my laboratory, the box Norbert had given me in my arms. Special accommodations were given to students who, for one reason or another, could not enter the Royal Academy during their 10th winter, or graduate during their 15th. They had previously been given out after the Civil War to the flood of apprentice blue priests and shrine maidens who entered the temple when that period was over. Under what circumstances was an Archduke candidate now requiring them? A year and a half ago, while everyone was gathered in the castle for winter socializing, she was attacked by a group of Ehrenfest nobles. She has been in a Derive ever since. I decided to read Ob Ehrenfest's letter first, and immediately my head started to spin. Just how far had Ehrenfest fallen for its own nobles to have attacked the archducal family? Has Lord Sylvester finally begun to act like a proper archduke, exasperating the conflict with Lady Veronica? I shook my head to dispel the idea. Allowing hope to lead me astray would only make the inevitable disappointment hurt all the more. Still, is a year and a half not far too long? I wondered, one normally only spent between 3 and 10 days in a Derive. Ah, yes. Of course, I muttered as I started piecing things together. Lady Rosamond was but a child and had not yet enrolled at the Royal Academy. She wouldn't have her own Derive and would thus be relying on that of a parent or an unmarried sibling, thereby explaining the dissonance. Alongside the letter from Lord Sylvester was one from his first wife, Lady Florencia. I read it as well. I apologize, Professor Herscher, but I am aware that special accommodations are no longer being provided for temple-raised apprentices, and that preparing them again would not be easy. Know that your work is for a good cause, though. Rosamond is such a precious girl, and it is because of her that my children are safe. I pray that you will do everything in your power to help maintain her future as a noble. Lady Charlotte, the Archduke's biological daughter, had apparently been kidnapped, and Lady Rosamond had been gravely wounded in the process of saving her. That came as no surprise. Branch families and adopted children were told ad nauseam to prioritize the first wife's children above all else. How irritating, but that will not stop me from preparing those special accommodations. Incidentally, I wonder whether these documents are in proper form. Lord Sylvester had put them together, and considering how shoddy his work had turned out to be, they were probably missing all sorts of crucial information. I gazed at the box dubiously, then took out the documents. Lady Rosamond's condition was written in small, precise letters. Is this Ferdinand's handwriting? He, of all people, is acting as Lady Rosamond's primary doctor. Doctor or not, a position in the castle meant his situation had improved from his days spent in the temple. Or perhaps Lady Rosamond was being so severely abused as an adopted daughter that she had not been permitted as a doctor, forcing Ferdinand to take the role? No! I sighed. It was impossible to know from these documents alone, and my disciple hadn't sent me a single update on his situation. These documents are so detailed, I would have been able to make a petition with only half as many. But if he knew these were going to reach me, he could have at least slipped a little letter to let me know how he's doing. Good grief. Considering how harshly Lady Veronica had treated Ferdinand when he was a student, it was hard to imagine her treating Lady Elvira's daughter, adopted or not otherwise, with any semblance of warmth. I envisioned my disciple standing at the forefront to protect this young girl, and instinctively I grimaced. He would do that, and he is doing that! Even now, with him being poisoned. Special accommodations need to be petitioned for during the Archduke Conference, and they require the direct approval of the royal family. I contacted the other professors and summoned them to an emergency meeting in the central building. The room we were using had been cleaned in preparation for the upcoming conference, so it was much nicer than usual. Gundulf was the first to speak. I must admit, Herscher, I never would have expected you to gather us together like this. With the Archduke Conference around the corner, I assumed you were immersed in research. Yep, she was at first. Yes, that is how I would rather be spending my time, instead of doing whatever task has been forced upon me, but I must do the bare minimum as a professor, and this development is something I cannot overlook. The other supervisors were far busier than I. They were all in the middle of preparing their dormitories, making sure everything was ready for their duchy's visitors. Gundulf chuckled. I do not know what happened, but you certainly exude the aura of a genuine professor. Oh my, do I not always? I showed the professor the documents from Ehrenfest and a copied-out portion of the Archduke's letter. Lady Rosamond, the intended recipient of these special accommodations, is not a mere blue priest or shrine maiden from the temple. She is the adoptive daughter of Ob Ehrenfest himself. What must have happened for a member of the archducal family to require such accommodations? Primavera asked, blinking at me curiously. These really were unthinkable circumstances. Members of the archducal family were given retainers at a young age and overseen by guard knights at all times. One of the duchy's own nobles attacked its castle, and she was gravely wounded while protecting the archduke's daughter by blood, and she has not yet enrolled as a student. She does not have a Derive. It is mentioned here that she has to rely on one given to her by a family member, but she has been asleep for a year and a half now, so its affinity to her mana must not be very high. Is that really enough to explain her unusually long sleep? Raffen asked. There must be something else. I could see his point. It wasn't particularly uncommon for children to use a family member's Sharif, and when they did, it rarely were they rendered unconscious for so long. Furthermore, Lady Rosamund had male siblings whose mana had never been influenced through marriage or what have you. If she had received one of their Sharifs, why had it been so incompatible? 'Cause he's not their blood sibling! Oh... According to these documents from her primary doctor at Ehrenfest, there are several contributing factors. As she was attacked in the castle, we can assume that everyone was in quite a panic, no? Time was of the essence, was why she had to accept the Sharif of her nearest brother, who was guarding the Archducal family at the time. I'm assuming they're keeping it a secret that she made the Sharif herself. Unfortunately, said brother has a history of marriage, and on top of that, Lady Rosamund's birth and baptismal mothers are not one and the same. That is why her affinity to the Sharif is so low. That's what they're going with, okay. But why use his Sharif to begin with? They should have sought her father's and... Robin paused, having at last understood. She is adopted, so her parents' Sharifs would not be in the castle. The Archduke's biological children would have had easy access to their parents' Sharifs, but not Lady Rosamund. There had been no guarantee that she would survive the journey to her estate, which is why they had needed to act quickly. A Sharif was needed to keep her from the distant heights, but her once-married elder brother was the only available donor. So it's kind of like a whole blood thing where if you're blood related, like transfusions essentially, except it's kind of different. But it's kind of the same idea, where if you have the same blood type, aka being blood related to the person, then the Sharif is possibly more compatible to you. It was a tough decision made under tremendously stressful circumstances. Lady Rosamund's father, Lord Cardstedt, serves as Ehrenfest's Knight Commander. Thus, when it came to light that members of the Archducal family had been attacked in the castle, he sprang into action. It also took him some time to retrieve his Sharif from his hidden room, and as his potion was given to Lady Rosamund immediately after she received one from her brother, there was a brief period where her body rejected it entirely. Oh, sighs filled the meeting room. These decisions, made under stress, had saved Lady Rosamund's life, but at the same time she was missing out on such an integral period of growth. Still, that was all a year and a half ago, Frau Alarm said. Is it not likely that her mana clumps will fail to dissolve and she will ascend to the distant heights? Okay, so Frau Alarm does not know that Rosamund and mine are the same person, I'm assuming at this point, right? Or that it was because of her that her brother-in-law was arrested and all that. I gave a curt nod. It is. Her recovery is lagged at best, and there are no signs that she will wake up. But she is still alive. We must not allow her future to be snuffed out when she was poisoned while protecting the Archduke's daughter. That is why I need your help. Is it not our duty as professors to support our students, new and old? After hearing my honest appeal, the other professors all agreed to the special accommodations and signed their names on a board to prove it. Now all that remained was for Lord Sylvester to obtain the royal family's permission during the Archduke conference. Well, I came all this way to the central building. Might as well stop by the dormitory and deliver the board. Then my duty will be at last be complete. Once our meeting concluded, I sent an ordinance to the Ehrenfest dormitory to inform them I was coming. Norbert was waiting in the entrance hall when I arrived. Professor Herser, he said, I am told you secured the Royal Academy's approval. I thank you. To my surprise, he was welcoming me not as a chiding uncle, but as the castle's head attendant. I would respond to him accordingly. Here is the board you need, Norbert. Sovereign scholars may begin to question the circumstances behind the attack on Lady Rosamund. Ehrenfest must be prepared to answer them alone. It had been my duty to obtain the permission of the other Royal Academy professors, but convincing the king rightly fell to the Archduke. Some time later, I received another ordinance. The royal family had agreed to our request during the Archduke conference, and Ab Ehrenfest was inviting me to a celebratory meal. I swiftly refused. Nothing good would come of eating with the Archduke and returning to my brewing. Summer came and went as I continued my research, and autumn began. These were quiet seasons in the Royal Academy, so most professors returned to their home duchy or the sovereignty. But it was also when gathering research materials became much easier. Herbs grew in abundance and fey plants bore fruit, so visiting the Royal Academy's gardens proved very enjoyable. As the end of autumn approached, the other professors started to return. Things were getting busier as servants began preparing for their new academic term, and it was then that an ordinance arrived for me. I was rarely ever contacted at this time of year, so it was an unusual development. What might have happened? This is the Ehrenfest dormitory, said one of the knights stationed in the teleportation hall. Professor Herser, a letter has arrived for you. We ask that you come retrieve it before the term begins. To honor their request, I went and collected the letter after completing my brewing. Oh, this is from Lord Ferdinand. I opened the letter. At the very beginning was an announcement that Lady Rosamund had woken up. She would be attending the Royal Academy normally and no longer required any special accommodations. For the sake of her future, having her attend alongside everyone else was her best move. The best move, assuming there was time to prepare. But as I read on, I was completely taken aback. Wait a moment. Why was none of this mentioned in the other letters? They had explained that Lady Rosemine wasn't Lady Avara's biological... Oh, they are explaining this to her! Okay. Oh, is she by herself? Is anybody else able to see this? Oh, so Hersher knows. Hersher knows that she's a commoner, right? Oh, never mind. Never mind. It says that that's the cover story they're coming up with. Wasn't Lady Avara's biological daughter, but there hadn't been as much of a mention that she was raised in the temple. Not to mention her noble education was apparently lacking due to her 2-year slumber. Lady Rosemine had more mana than the average Archduke Candidate, as one would expect of a child adopted into the Archducal family, but sleeping in a dream had made her flow somewhat unstable. According to the letter, she needed supportive magic tools just to move, and she was having trouble controlling her mana as well. In short, Ferdinand wanted me to watch Lady Rosemine carefully during her practical lessons, though he specified she would have no problems at all with the written ones. He wrote at length and in detail about what he had taught her. Rosemine has absurd and fascinating thought patterns, so she will surely be of use to your research. She is in your care. I said, reading the letter aloud. You cannot be serious, Ferdinand. If you had time to write so extensively about Lady Rosemine, could you not have added at least a sentence about yourself? That's how Ferdinand is. He works for everybody else's sake but himself, even at the cost of his possible life. Still, this letter had been written with far more enthusiasm than the one I received months ago. No, wait, what I'm saying is, he used to be like that where he'd only worried about himself, because, survival and all that, but now that he has Rosemine to worry about, it's kind of changed. I recalled my disciple's habit of growing more talkative when it came to research that interested him, and a smile rose my lips. For him to have written this, he must be doing better than when he feared that Lady Veronica would soon succeed at killing him. Still, this letter focuses entirely on Lady Rosemine. How rare is it for Ferdinand, of all people, to be this concerned about another, a fascinating Archduke candidate with bizarre and creative ideas. I wonder what she will do during her time here. Despite having stressed that Lady Rosemine was educated enough to breeze through her written lessons, Ferdinand went on to provide a long and very detailed list of things to be aware of when teaching her and the like. He clearly saw her as a disciple and was very fond of her despite all the trouble she caused him. He is. Or else he wouldn't have been putting in this much effort for her. I thought back to the days when Ferdinand was a student. He had secured high grades, but there had been no end to his shenanigans. I wonder, has he finally learned the struggles of being a mentor? I cackled, recalling the many incidents he had caused and all that he had achieved. Winter was upon us, and so was Lady Rosemine's enrollment at the Royal Academy. She would presumably tell me more about Ferdinand than I could ever discern from his letters. At that thought, I really started to look forward to meeting my disciple's disciple. Okay, Roderick. She who saved my heart. I'm guessing this is when he gave his name to Rosemine. Description: a sales bonus for Part 4, Volume 2. During a meeting in the Royal Academy, the Med Noble Roderick faces another day of abuse from the other members of the former Veronica faction. Author's note. Many of you wanted to know more about the nobles of the former Veronica faction living in the Airfest dormitory, and they're exactly whom this story focuses on. I was under the impression that Viscount Joisenstock went rogue and acted alone, but to think the soldiers who attacked the Archducal family belonged to an Ehrensbach noble. We children of the former Veronica faction, numbering a dozen or so in total, were gathered in a meeting room. The air was heavy, but also laced with understanding. They explained the circumstances to us so that we knew why the Archducal family intended to distance themselves from Ehrensbach. Roderick, good on you for asking. Knowing why the Ob is on guard against Ehrensbach puts us in a much better position to plan ahead. Lord Matthias, a third-year apprentice knight, said to me with a smile. It hadn't been easy speaking in front of everyone in the dining hall, especially when Lord Wolfried thought so poorly of me, but nobody had wanted to take my place. I needed to ask, no matter how scary it was. Thankfully, everyone had accepted Lady Rosemine's answer, meaning my duty was now complete. I relaxed my shoulders while looking around the meeting room. My intentions were to keep my head down and wait for the discussion to end. 2 years ago, during the hunting tournament, my father had instructed me to play with Lord Wolfried. Naturally, I did as he asked. But it was because of my actions that Lord Wolfried ended up committing a grave crime. I mean, all you had to do was play with him. As far as we know from this context, he hadn't done anything else besides following Wolfried's lead and the adult's lead, essentially. My father had ostracized me ever since, claiming I had betrayed our shining ray of hope. Those who had once been my friends now looked at me with cold, scornful eyes. Maybe this will make my life in the faction easier. Everyone was focused on what the former Veronica faction should do next, but I was thinking only about myself. Lord Matthias continued, I was sure that our faction would regain some power, that time would slowly bury Ahrensbach's involvement in Lady Veronica's treachery. But if Ahrensbach was also involved in this attack, the Archducal family will never lower their guard. Things are not looking good for us. Most of the people here had connections with Ahrensbach nobles, and understandably so. Our faction had started out as the children and grandchildren of the retainers Lady Gabriel brought with her from Ahrensbach when she married into Ehrenfest. Lady Veronica told us to continue strengthening our bonds with Ahrensbach, and the Archduke's elder sister Lady Georgine was even married to the Abb there. Guess it's no surprise that my older brother, Fruden's engagement to an Ahrensbach girl was rejected, added Lord Lorenz a second year while shaking his head. Of dark green hair. Pretty rare for an Archduke to refuse a union that both fathers support, right? I was real curious about what was going on, but there's one mystery solved. The next contribution came from Lady Patricia. During a tea party I attended before coming here, it was mentioned that Lord Lamprecht, who serves Lord Wilfrid as a guard knight, also had his engagement proposal refused. The explanation was originally that he lives in the nobles' quarter, but if a Gieb had theirs rejected as well. She cast her eyes down. Mine will certainly be refused too. Lady Patricia was a fifth year with a lover at Ahrensbach. Apparently she was even taking action to secure their engagement. I was still a first year, so all this talk of marriage didn't mean much to me. But a stir spread through those who hadn't known the Abb was refusing certain engagements. Ever since Lady Georgine's visit, the adults of our faction had instructed us to form closer bonds with Ahrensbach so that we could suppress the lies gangs and reclaim our former power. Those who already had partners in Ahrensbach sure have it rough. I won't ever have to worry about that, though. I wasn't my family's successor, and my mother has a second wife. Perhaps I would have been able to find a partner by serving Lord Wilfrid, but after the Ivory Tower incident, that was never going to happen. Besides, nobody will want to marry a noble on bad terms with their archducal family. Father ordered me to take Lord Wilfrid to the Ivory Tower. Then, when he found out that going there is a crime, he started beating me. I would never be given permission to marry and start a branch family. I understand why the Abb is on guard against Ahrensbach, Lord Lorenz said, but how can we cut ties with a duchy we share a border with? Treating their merchants with suspicion will also harm Ehrenfest's economy. What does he expect Giebs to do? His father was Viscount Woltord, the Gieb of a province bordering Ahrensbach, so his concerns were understandable. There were orders in place to keep any foreign nobles out of our nobles' quarter, and he was worried that this rule might spread to the entire duchy. Gerlach also shares a border with Ahrensbach, and we get along very well with their nobles, Lord Matthias added. I don't know the details, but it turns out that my father was put under suspicion, too. He gave a troubled smile. I suppose he did associate with Viscount Joisenstock. These two sons of Giebs were only a couple years older than me at most, but they were considering our situation from so many different more angles than I was. As someone who lived in the nobles' quarter, it hadn't even occurred to me that the provinces bordering Ahrensbach would struggle. Lady Veronica never would have let this happen, grumbled Lord Robert, a sixth year. If only we could have saved her when we had the chance. He looked daggers at me, and my entire body froze. Gone were the high spirits that Lady Rose might have put me in. 2 years had passed since that detestable hunting tournament, and while I was accustomed to the abuse, it still made me feel miserable. I remembered all too clearly the events of that fateful day when my life was turned on its head. My friends and I were called over by our fathers, whereupon they told us to invite Lord Wilfrid to play and take him to the Ivory Tower where Lady Veronica was staying. They warned us not to go inside, though. Only members of the archducal family could open the door. I'd enjoyed playing with my friends so much, more than anything. Only through the winter playroom had I managed to connect with other boys before then. I'd only ever played with the daughters of my mother's friends. On top of that, my family's circumstances had always made it hard for me to visit people. And so we searched the forest for the Ivory Tower, doing exactly as we were instructed. Eventually we found it, and as our fathers had told us, Lord Wilfrid was able to open the door. We thought nothing of it when he went inside. We all just stood around waiting for him to return, speculating about what was in there and wishing that we could join him. After a while, Lord Wilfrid came back outside. He told us that his grandmother had sworn him to secrecy and refused to elaborate no matter how much we wanted him to. We even asked whether he wanted to be alone to think about whether it was bothering him, but he shook his head and replied that he didn't get many chances to play with us. We had done what our fathers had asked of us, so we went back to having fun. Sometime after the hunting tournament came the start of winter socializing. Only then did we learn that Lord Wilfrid was no longer guaranteed to become the next Abb. He had been demoted for his crime of entering the Ivory Tower, and the nobles who had informed him of its location were given small but meaningful punishments. Back then I hadn't understood what the Archduke was saying. I had merely stared at him in confusion, but that very moment my days of peace had come to an unfortunate end. That same night, the archducal family was attacked. When I saw Lord Wilfrid in the winter playroom the next day, he gave me the most reproachful glare. The other children who had played with us during the tournament had pinned the blame on me, claiming that I had suggested we go to the Ivory Tower. Things were even worse at home. My father struck me without restraint, telling me that my failure had doomed their plan. Out of nowhere, my whole world had come crashing down. I was the subject of scorn, belittled, and attacked at every turn. It was so unfair that I didn't even know what to say. In fact, there was nothing I could say. Because of my low status, my only choice was to accept the abuse. Lord Wilfrid was defended as a matter of course. How unfortunate that he lost his claim to the archducal seat, people would say. He did not know that entering the Ivory Tower is a crime. Meanwhile, I was condemned under the axiom that ignorance of the law is no excuse, that my ignorance was a crime in itself. Then that should be the same for Wilfrid. If he didn't know, it still didn't matter. It's still ignorant. Ignorance can't be bliss on this one. Despite his punishment, Lord Wilfrid continued to live as a normal member of the archducal family. He was respected by all and treated no differently from Lady Charlotte. At the very least, it didn't seem like his own faction would make him feel eternally unsafe. It didn't seem like he was being beaten by his father and then forced to drink rejuvenation potions until the bruises faded. We were both victims of ignorance, but I'm treated so much worse. Status sure is everything. Quit it, Rupert, came an unexpected voice. Your attitude is so pathetic that it pains me just to look at you. The incident with the Ivory Tower happened because Lord Wilfrid and his former retainers didn't know that what was forbidden. I had been staring down at my feet and waiting for the abuse to end, but I was so surprised that I looked up again. There was Lord Jonric, Lord Matthias' older brother, waving away Lord Rupert with a look of disgust. Lord Rupert fell silent, though he continued to fix me with a hateful glare. The others around him looked just as sickened by me being there. Lord Jonric is right, Lord Lorenz said. Roderick has also made it clear that he was only doing as his father instructed, or did you all forget? Lord Matthias nodded along in agreement. Life at the Royal Academy has improved for us ever since Lady Rosamund woke up and started discouraging for faction dispute in the dormitory. Rather than being forever stuck in the past, we need to think about our future. Last year and the year before, the Lies gangs had started throwing their weight around in the Ehrenfest dormitory, resulting in some very harsh treatment for those of the former Veronica faction. This was my first year at the Royal Academy, so I didn't have any first-hand experience of those days, but I suspected that tensions in the winter playroom were to blame. Things might have improved, but they were even better when I first enrolled, Lord Rupert snapped. I could speak with the Lies gangs as equals instead of constantly needing to gauge their mood. If only Lady Veronica were here. If Lady Veronica were here, Rosamund wouldn't have been in there. Lord Rupert's reminiscing always made me wish I had been born a few years earlier. As he so often said, our lives would have been much easier if Lady Veronica had never been imprisoned. Don't rule out Lady Georgine, Lord Jonric said. She's going to be visiting more often, and with Arensbach's support under his belt, it shouldn't be hard for Lord Wilfrid to make a comeback and become the next Ob. He even seems to be on good terms with Lady Detlinde. Oh, God. He turned to address the room. Together, Lady Georgine and Lord Wilfrid will strengthen our connection to Arensbach. A connection that Lady Gabriel and Lady Veronica worked so hard to create. His words carried a certain gravitas, maybe because he was a six-year and had seen the dormitory change so many times. Lord Rupert seemed convinced, too. Right, from what I've heard, Lord Wilfrid wants to socialize with Lady Georgine. We just need to be patient. Lady Veronica will surely be pardoned and freed from the Ivory Tower. Nope. Thank you. I doubt that, Lord Jonric replied with a shrug. Thank you. Lady Veronica committed a crime so grave that not even the Ob, her son, could protect her any longer. I can't imagine what it would take to get her out. Well, he has it on that, yeah. He didn't seem at all convinced that Lady Veronica would return, whereas Lord Rupert still considered her our faction's greatest hope. But her hands are clean. Lord Ferdinand masterminded it all in an act of revenge. I mean, even if he did, I think he was justified in his revenge. He went to the temple and waited for everyone to lower their guards. That's what Father advised Ehrenfest not to send him to the temple and to instead follow Lady Veronica's advice by... Rupert, you would be wise not to criticize the Ob, Lord Jonric said. Rupert looked around the room and sighed. I share your opinion that what happened was part of a scheme, but I do not doubt that Lady Veronica committed the crime she was charged with. I am merely saying that Lord Wilfrid, when he becomes Ob, will overturn her punishment as a relic of the past. Now that is likely. Lord Wilfrid was raised by Lady Veronica, and he surely wouldn't leave his own grandmother to rot. That depends. If he realizes that she was responsible for everything bad that had happened to his uncle, who has done everything to help him, even despite the fact that he wanted him to be disinherited, he still helped him and still gave him ability to study and everything. So, I mean, yeah. He even went to Arensbach, even though he hated the idea. But Wilfrid doesn't understand this, because the guy's an idiot. Those of our faction agreed with Rupert, and in their desperation they immediately expounded on the power of blood relations and the gratitude of a person must feel toward whoever raised them. They were useless ideals, I thought, as I stroked my chest, still able to feel my father's gloves. I would cast aside blood ties and filial piety in a heartbeat. Not to mention, Lady Rosamund is clearly better suited to become the next Ob. There had been a major contrast between the first and second years of the Winter Playroom. Lady Rosamund had sat at a distance and carefully overseen things as opposed to Lord Wolfred and Lady Charlotte, who had simply started playing like all the other children. She was just in a league of her own. Do you really think so? Lord Matthias asked. Do you truly believe Lord Wolfred is capable of making a comeback? Matthias, Lord Jonric snapped, but his brother still continued in a calm and quiet voice. Lord Wolfred may be scoring excellent grades, but I cannot see him making a grand return when he has a criminal record. There are also the obvious comparisons to Lady Rosebud, considering that they both are the same age. Technically she's older, but whatever. Even to someone of another faction, her superiority is more than clear. The excitement started to wane once again. I agree with Lord Matthias entirely, and everyone in their third year or below who had experienced Lady Rosamund's Winter Playroom surely did too. Lord Jonric shook his head in bemusement. I'll accept that Lady Rosamund is extraordinary, but aren't you showing her a little too much favoritism? Aren't you showing Lord Wolfred favoritism here? You need more than just talent and skill to become an Ob. No matter how great she may be, no matter how much the Lice Gang support her, she is not a child of Lady Florencia, whom the Ob loves above all else. She is also a female. It's highly unlikely she will be selected as the next Ob. If she wanted it, I'm sure they'd let her have it. But she doesn't. But brother, Ob Arifest cannot cut off our faction entirely, and considering the current balance of power, he cannot disregard Lord Wolfred either. That is why Lord Wolfred will stage a comeback. Father and I expect he will marry Lady Rosamund to silence the Lice Gangs. He was going to at first, but then he realized that he hated the idea. Because, I mean, I don't think he'd be able to stand marrying Rosamund. No offense to Rosamund, they're just two different people who aren't compatible. Not just in personalities, but in mana too. At least capacity, anyway. Lord Jarmric's prediction seemed very reasonable to me, but that was the Ob truly unable to sever ties with the former Veronica faction? I wanted to believe so, but with how the Lice Gang numbers were now taking the lead, I really have my doubts. Do you have proof that the Ob will not cut us off, Lord Jonric? First, there are many of our factions still among his retainers. Second, even the Lice Gangs have heavily restricted access to Lady Rosamund. Third, abandoning us entirely would cripple his administration, he replied, counting off the reasons on his fingers. He would only be creating needless ire by replacing the innocent. We'll see. I ended up nodding along. Everything that Lord Jarmric said made sense. Even when Lady Veronica held power, the Ob put Lice Gang nobles among Lady Florencia's retainers and ensured that each faction had equal representation in the Archducal family's service. In the past, this frustrated me, but now it makes me certain that the former Veronica faction will not be pushed aside. Well, unless something truly damning happens. Foreshadowing! Foreshadowing! So, as our meeting concluded, we all agreed there was no reason to be pessimistic about the future. As mere children bound to our parents' faction, we didn't need to come to any hard conclusions. We just wanted somewhere in this closed-off dormitory we could spend our time in peace. The next day, Lady Rosamund began visiting the library, which meant we first-years could start going too. This wasn't part of an official rule. Under normal circumstances, the library was freely accessible to anyone who was registered. But none of us had dared step foot in the building while Lady Rosamund was being denied access. Yeah, you don't want that. Lady Rosamund quickly developed a daily routine. She would borrow a book with a satisfied smile and return to the dormitory right before 6 bell. Then after dinner she would retire to her room, presumably to read. Yep. She had much less of a presence in the common room as a result, which made Lord Wolfred and his retainers far more dominant. They kept a close eye on any student in the former Veronica faction, fearing that we would attempt some horrible act again. In just a few days, the common room became an unbearable place for me to stay. I needed somewhere I could feel at ease from when Lady Rosamund went to the library until afternoon practical lessons. Where can I run and hide? I murmured while bathing. Men nobles generally lived in large shared rooms rather than their own personal ones. We also had to save our mana for classes, which meant we didn't have enough leeway to create our own hidden rooms. Thus, the only places I could escape the eyes of the other students were in bed and the bathroom. You wish for somewhere to hide? Asked Kashmir, my attendant. He gave me a pitying look, probably because of all the time we'd spent in peace here at the dormitory. How about the library? None would cause a fuss with Lady Rosamund around. Plus, it would give you an excellent chance to transcribe books, which is Crest-certified work. I cannot think of a better place to lay low. Probably a good idea. Lady Rosamund forbade faction politics, saying it could wait until we returned to Ehrenfest, and praised everyone equally no matter their status. It was true that nobody could cause a fuss in her presence. Or would cause a fuss. Because they'd probably get crushed if they did. On top of that, earning money would be an exceptionally smart move for me considering my father's lack of support. I would also be able to use their funds to hire servants, which I was sure Kashmir would appreciate. But Kashmir, her retainers would oppose my being there, wouldn't they? Those serving Lord Wolfrid treat me more harshly than Lord Wolfrid himself. Lady Rosamund personally requested those transcriptions. As long as you do not approach her and to antagonize her retainers, you should be fine. So at Kashmir's advice, I started going to the library. I set out as soon as I saw Lady Rosamund's group getting ready to leave, and soon arrived at the reading room. Before I could secure myself a carol, the library shoemill said, "My lady is here," and hopped away. As it turned out, they welcomed Lady Rosamund personally. As soon as Lady Rosamund entered the reading room, she went up to the second floor. She probably had a book in mind already. Meanwhile, I stood around absentmindedly, waiting for the shoemill to return. "Oh, Lord Roderick, are you here to transcribe books too?" asked Felina Lay Noble. I noticed that she was on her way to a carol with writing utensils in hand. She never seemed awkward or distant when she spoke to me, maybe because we had been comrades in arms in our battles to pass our history and geography exams the first time around. "I was thinking of transcribing a book for Lady Rosamund," I replied. "Do you have any idea what she might want?" "Yes, I have a list right here. I'm about to start transcribing this book." She pointed at one of the titles on her list. Then she tapped a finger against a second and continued, "So perhaps you could transcribe this one?" From there, Feline called over the shoemills, then requested the 2 books she had pointed out and 2 carols. She took care of everything but seemed a little awkward while doing so, probably because she wasn't used to recommending titles to others. As I was watching Feline's preparations, I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I turned around and immediately spotted Lord Hartmut staring at us from a short distance away. The cold, scrutinizing look in his orange eyes made me freeze up all at once. "Oh, Hartmut, what are you doing?" "Lord Roderick, your carol is right." Feline trailed off. "Is something wrong?" "Lord Hartmut seems to be glaring at me. Should I be worried?" "Oh, Hartmut is simply watching to make sure I carried out his instructions without issue." A smile spread across her lips. I was truly anxious when I first became a retainer, but everyone in Lady Rosamund's service is so kind, which came as such a relief. I wanted to say that's great, but the words caught in my throat. Feline was getting to be Lady Rosamund's retainer, and she was in a position where she could address Lord Hartmut without a title. I couldn't help but feel annoyed. Why does a lay noble get to be so happy? I knew that it was unreasonable of me to lash out, but I couldn't help it. All of my envy kept bubbling up to the surface. The best I could do was grit my teeth and try to focus my mind. "Feline," came a voice so unexpected that it made me jump. Lord Hartmut had at some point approached us. "You said the line's right, but you still seemed a bit awkward about going through the process. Show any sign of weakness to students from other duchies, and they'll look down on you. You need more practice." I thanked Feline for the book and paper, then hurried into my carol and locked it behind me. I set down my ink and paper, then took a seat and started thumbing through the book that was chosen for me. It contained scenes with knights in combat, and the moment I saw them, a wave of emotion swept through me. I couldn't help but think of the story I'd given to Lady Rosamund. Feline and I both told stories that were made into books, but only she was chosen. How come she's much luckier than me? Sadly, faction politics, dude. She wasn't in the Veronica faction. You were. It'll be a while before you can actually be her retainer, but at least then you'll be happy. I gritted my teeth more fiercely and glared at the book, trying to hold back my tears. This was a carol in the library, not a hidden room. If only I were part of another faction. Had I been born to different parents, I might have been where Feline is now. I was so jealous because I wanted Lady Rosamund to accept me. I'd never been able to afford cards and playing cards, and seeing the other kids' parents buying them had always felt so unfair. But then 3 years ago, after our debuts at the end of winter, Lady Rosamund had so graciously offered to lend them to those of us who couldn't afford them. In return, we had only needed to give her a story. I'd ended up choosing a tale my mother had told me about a courageous knight, but the more I tried to repeat it, the more I confused myself. Failure wasn't an option, so I was trying my absolute best, but it felt like the details were all being scrubbed from my mind with purification magic. And the more I panicked, the more my mind went blank. Still, I saw my story through to the end. It was fragmented and nonsensical, but Lady Rosamund listened to this entire thing with a smile and wrote down my every word. At the time, I'd simply been glad to receive some playing cards, but everything changed just a year later. Lady Rosamund was attacked and ended up in a long slumber, and everyone suddenly started to see me as their enemy. It was around then that the Planted Company held another book sale, and among their stock was something I'd never expected, a glimmer of light in my otherwise pitch-dark world. A collection of the very same stories we told in the winter playroom. I couldn't even describe how much that had moved me. Some even read my story and smiled, saying it was really entertaining. Father had called me useless and an unnecessary part of the family, but now I actually felt needed, like I could still make it in the world. But that joyous moment soon faded. After all, the Lady Rosamund, the person who had given me a chance to begin with, wasn't there to share it with me. The next thing I knew, 2 years had passed since the Ivory Tower incident. Everyone called me the shame of my family. I was used to being bullied and no longer saw the point in living. Oh, poor guy. Poor Roderick, he doesn't deserve this. But this winter, things just felt just a bit more manageable. Because of my father's abuse, the cold shoulder I was getting from Lord Wilfred, and the general consensus among my faction that I'd wounded us all for no good reason, I no longer had a place at home in the winter playroom. That was why I was so grateful to Lady Rosemont. She treated me so warmly as she would anyone else. My story from 2 years ago was praised, and she even gave me some money as compensation. I wonder if she'll do that again. Yes, she will. Nobody else could understand how much being able to live normally in the dormitory meant to me. Even my family considered me worthless. I'm gonna write a story. I'd stopped writing when my life took such a turn for the worse, but I was suddenly overcome with the feeling to start again. I didn't want to give Lady Rosemont a transcription that anyone could produce. I wanted to give her a story that only I could write. Not in exchange for playing cards, but as a show of appreciation. Anything would do. I just wanted to write something. So I picked up my pen and dipped it in the ink jar. 8 minutes. I'll try one more. Feline, coming home from the Royal Academy. A previously unpublished short story. Feline returns home after finishing her first year at the Royal Academy. After leaving the castle, she once again has to face the harsh realities of being a lay noble. Oh. Author's note, the sales bonus for Part 4, Volume 3 ended up being too long, so I took away the first half and turned it into the short story. Of course, this means there might be some overlap with the original, but this chapter focuses more on how retainers prepare for their returns home and the relationship Feline has with her attendant Asberga. Such introductions would normally be done by one's lord or lady, but as ours happens to be in such a state, I shall act in her place. Rhaearda shot a brief, worried glance at the bedridden Lady Rosemont before moving to introduce us to the adult retainers who had stayed behind in the castle. Upon our return from the Royal Academy, Lord Bonifacius had thrown Lady Rosemont into the air and made her so dizzy that she was now having to rest. These two are Lady Rosemont's retainers from the castle, Rhaearda continued. I imagine many of you already recognize her attendant Audley, since she is the Hartmann's mother. The other is Lady Rosemont's guard knight, Daniel. He is a lay noble, but he has served her since she was in the temple and is very trustworthy. Those lined up against the wall over there are newly assigned to be Milady's retainers at the Royal Academy. First is the apprentice attendant. I knew Daniel well. In the 2 years that Lady Rosemont had spent asleep, he had served as our go-between with Lord Ferdinand and overseen the books being lent out in the playroom. I'd also helped him with his work, and we'd spoken often enough that I considered us to be on good terms. Feline, congratulations on being chosen, he said. I knew how hard it is being a lay noble in this position, so you can always come to me if there's something on your mind that you feel you can't discuss with anyone else. Thank you, I replied. I certainly will when the time comes. Daniel knew that I had been gathering stories for Lady Rosemont's sake, and seeing his gentle smile and kind gray eyes made a pleasant warmth spread through my chest. At that moment I decided to work just as hard as he did. We were now fellow retainers after all. You're always welcome to come to me too, Audley added. Send word as soon as Hartman tries to make us any unreasonable request of you. She was wearing a kind smile too, and I noticed then that her eyes were just as orange as her son's. My worries about being treated harshly because of my status faded right away. Hartman is always a very considerate teacher, I said. It is because of him that I can proudly say I am Lady Rosemont's retainer at the Royal Academy. That is nice to hear, but I mean it. You should tell me when he goes too far. Yeah. Oh, God. It seemed that even a focused and accomplished student like Hartman had to deal with worried parents. The motherly concern on Audley's face and in her voice made me think of my own mother, who was no longer with us. If she were still alive, would she have worried about me in the same way? Probably. I was a little envious of Hartman, but more than that, being reminded of my mother again after so long filled me with tender wistfulness. Once we had all been introduced and given an overview of our duties in the castle, we apprentices were permitted to leave a bit earlier than usual. This was because we had just come back from the Royal Academy. Lady Rosemont's adult retainers will accompany her for dinner, Rhaearda said. Everyone else, you may return home and spend the rest of the day at your leisure. If you will excuse us, then. We passed through the retainer room and into the corridor. As retainers, we had to go through the retainer room whenever we entered or exited Lady Rosemont's chambers. We then made our way down the hallway connecting the northern and main buildings. It was strange to actually be somewhere that was exclusive to the Archduke's children and their retainers. Here's some advice for when it's time to come back to the castle tomorrow, Cornelius said, impacting to us some of the wisdom he had acquired over several years as a guard knight. Those who commute to the castle should arrive after second bell. We use the retainer entrance, which is on the first floor of the main building, on the north side if you come with me. We went through the retainer entrance and into the main building. Once inside, Cornelius called out for Norbert, the Archduke's head attendant, and the men in charge of the Archducal family's retainers. These are Lady Rosemont's new retainers, he said. They will be using the store starting tomorrow. Yes, I received word from Rhaearda, Norbert replied. We have finished our own preparations. He then looked at each of us in turn and said, if the Archducal family is to use the carriage, an attendant here will make the necessary arrangements. If any of you intend to use one, have your attendants put forth the request. Nerval was only involved with the comings and goings of the Archducal family. The castle attendants dealt with everything else. He listed off more instructions, then guided us to another room. Your attendants prepared carriages for the trip home and are waiting for you here, Nerval continued. And as he said, out came our attendants who had accompanied us to the castle. To a carriage emblazoned with the crest of our respective house. Naturally, we were going to make our way in order of status, which meant I would be last to leave. If you'll excuse me, let us meet tomorrow as the goddess of light arises. Indeed, Cornelius Brunhilde Hartmut Lenore as the goddess of light rises. The 4 archnobles and then the men nobles, Lisletta and Judith, climbed into their luggage-filled carriages. Lisletta was returning home alone today because her older sister Angelica was due to guard Lady Rosamine's dinner. Here you are, Lady Feline, said my attendant Iceberga once the others were all gone. We climbed into the carriage together. Asperga was the older cousin of my late mother. She had ended up with some time on her hands after her own child came of age last year, so she had to accompany me to the Royal Academy. Nobody had been happier for me when I first learned that I was becoming Lady Rosamine's retainer. Once we were seated, Asperger signaled the driver, and our luggage-packed carriage slowly began moving forward. I am so relieved to have finished the year without making any major mistakes or getting seriously scolded, Asperger said. Adapting to my sudden assignment as a retainer had been hard on the both of us, especially in terms of money, but rooming with Judith instead of renting on my own helped a bit. And Riarda had paid for me some of my salary in advance for when I had spoken with her about my situation. I'd also managed to build up some savings by gathering intelligence and stories alongside Hartmut, so I was safe for now. You should be proud, Lady Feline, Asperger assured me. It is a remarkable achievement for a lay noble to be selected to serve as an archducal retainer. I am proud of you as well. It was such a relief to see that Lady Rosamund is kind to those who serve her, and that your co-workers are also welcoming, rather than being the type to ostracize those below them in status. I intend to accompany you to the Royal Academy next year as well, so do put in a good word for my family. Asperger had only reluctantly accepted when I asked her to serve as my attendant earlier this winter, but now she was promising to stick with me next year as well. She was likely acting with her own interest in heart, but this benefited me anyway. My family had been getting increasingly distant ever since Mother's death, but if they came back in force, Conrad and I would have some protection at home, where we had been facing more and more exclusion. Lady Jonsara has been treating us so maliciously since her own child was born, I said. It feels like she turned into someone else entirely, and with how much control Father gives her, I can't help but worry about Conrad. I wouldn't have been so concerned if my father would properly stop Lady Jonsara, but he always gave her full control over matters of the house and tended to ignore our opinions. After giving birth, a mother tends to prioritize her child above all else, Asperger explained. Lady Jonsara may be more at ease when her son's position becomes more stable, but as the wife of a widower, she is naturally faced with many hardships. She acts out of a desperate impulse to protect her child, as it cannot be helped. Lady Jonsara's new personality is anything but abrupt and unfair, but Asperger said there was nothing that could be done about it. Apparently, I would understand when I had a child of my own, though. I didn't want to understand something that could make a person turn so cruel. Still, Asperger continued, I predicted that this would happen and warned Lord Koschik again and again not to have a child with her. I wonder what drove him to impregnate a secondary wife nonetheless. He could have at least waited until Conrad enrolled at the Royal Academy so I would not need to worry like this. My mother had passed away only a season or so after Conrad was born. According to what others told me, Father had thus been faced with 2 options. Hire a long-term live-in maid to nurse him and take another wife. He chose the latter. It was the most economical choice as I understood it. At the time, Lady Jonsara also happened to be struggling with the death of a family member, Asperger said. Given the trying circumstances, nobody would have criticized her father for taking her as a wife and using her aunt Enerva's services as an attendant. That is, assuming he had intended to use this help to support his own children, she sighed. Instead, he impregnated his secondary wife and abandoned both you and Conrad. His actions have been exceedingly foolish, and in truth, Lady Jonsara is shockingly ungrateful. Hearing her complain actually made me feel a little relieved. It was nice to know that someone else was angry with Father and Lady Jonsara. I said all that to Father, but he gave me a harsh scolding and said that I wasn't being considerate enough of Lady Jonsara's child-rearing. However, I simply refused his criticisms. Oh my, Mother put Conrad in my care before she passed away, but my dear brother's situation really isn't good for him. Lady Jonsara was always so busy with her baby that she would neglect to feed us. She shrieked in outrage over the smallest trouble, and she was always quick to raise her hand to us in the name of discipline. Just thinking about her soured my mood. If she was going to forget our basic needs, then the least she could do was not complain when I instructed the servants to prepare food on her behalf. If she was going to be all prideful about that duty belonging to the woman of the house, then she should actually carry it out. I agree. I should like to have Lady Jonsara move to a side building, I announced. What do you think of that, Asperger? Normally, second wives were given side buildings in which to live, so as to avoid any disputes with the first wife and her children. Feuds and discord were nigh inevitable otherwise. Unfortunately, Lady Jumpstart was not a normal second wife. She had been brought into our family to raise Conrad and me, so she had always lived in the main estate. That fact remained even now that she had given birth to her own child. I didn't intend to push for a divorce or force Lady Jumpstart to leave. I was well aware that she and her baby wouldn't fare well on their own. But if she was going to abandon Conrad entirely, I wanted her and Inera to move into a side building. Now that I am Lady Rosamund's retainer, my salary is higher than that of a normal apprentice. Conrad is also old enough not to require much extra care with meals and the like, so as long as I'm careful with my savings, I should be able to hire servants for him. That is, if you can keep your savings from this lady. Which, we know that didn't happen. I was bringing this up now in hopes that Iceberga would give me her support when I broached the idea to Father, but after some thought she shook her head. I understand how you feel all too well, but I do not believe that is possible right now. We still do not know how much it will cost to prepare all you will need to live as a retainer of the Archducal family. Do you believe Lord Koshik will choose to spend on both preparing a side building and supporting your own lifestyle? If he had such funds at his disposal, he would have hired a maid to begin with instead of remarrying. Her calm and accurate analysis made me hang my head. I'd assumed that because I now had an income and was soon to learn a pneumatic compression method, I would be able to protect Conrad without hurting my family's finances, but as it turned out, no matter how hard I worked, I simply didn't have enough power yet. It is nothing to feel down about, Iceberga said consolingly. Lord Koshik married into your family. He is not the head of your house, meaning the estate will instead be passed down to you and Conrad. Not to mention, as you have been chosen as Lady Rosamund's retainer, they will not be able to treat you poorly. You will be of age by the time Conrad enters the Royal Academy, at which point you can use your status as someone serving the Archducal family to give him the backing he'll require. You need only be patient. Yeah, she wasn't able to last that long. I nodded, assuming that Father and Lady Jumpstart respected our positions more now than I was Lady Rosamund's retainer. The abuse we were so used to would surely come to an end. No. I was correct to offer my loyalty to Lady Rosamund, whether it was by telling me to write down Mother's stories so I wouldn't forget them, or choosing me as her retainer. Lady Rosamund was always saving me. I was resolved to serve her as faithfully and as diligently as I could, and at that thought our carriage rolled into my estate. Welcome back, Lady Feline, said Inara once we were inside. She and a male servant were the only ones here to greet us. Oh my, Iceberga remarked, her brow furrowed. I sent word of our coming well in advance, so where is Lady Jumpstart? Inara turned around to look down the hall, then quietly replied, my sincerest apologies, but she is answering the call of Wagon Milch. That was what she said whenever Lady Jumpstart was too preoccupied with her baby to do anything else. Incidentally, according to Lady Rosamund's picture book Bibles, Wagon Milch was a goddess who raised and protected children before their baptism. I see, Iceberga said. I wished to greet her, but there was no helping that. Have the servant bring in the luggage. I will ride the carriage back later. Oh, and I wish to see Conrad again. It's been far too long. Call for him. Inara looked troubled by this request, but he has not yet been baptized. That is not a problem. I am related to him through his late mother. I wish to see his face. Realizing that Iceberga wasn't going to budge, Inara looked to me for help, but I certainly wasn't going to interfere. It would greatly benefit Conrad and me to have Iceberga in our corner, and getting her to meet my brother now would assist him considerably in the future. If you are busy, Inara, then I will call him myself. Oh no, allow me. My apologies, Lady Feline, but could you serve Lady Iceberga some tea? I can, I replied. I took Iceberga to the guest parlor and did my very best to politely serve her a drink. She sipped from her cup and then grimaced a little. Evidently the tea wasn't very nice. My apologies that I must serve our drinks, I said. Inara is our estate's only attendant. That certainly seems inconvenient, she replied, wiping her mouth. To my knowledge, attendants trained in the temple can be purchased rather cheaply. They cannot use magic tools, but they should be well suited to a lady noble estate. Lady Rosamund might accommodate the idea if you ask her. Indeed, maybe it would be wise to consult her when I properly start earning my salary. If possible, I wanted new attendants to care for Conrad and me at the very least. I have brought Lord Conrad, Inara finally announced, slowly leading him into the room by the hand. Welcome back home, sister, he said. I'm glad you're back. He looked thinner than I remembered, but would close my mouth before I could say anything. I couldn't bring myself to interrupt him while he was doing his best to repeat the greeting Inara had apparently taught him. Plus, it would be rude to interrogate Inara in front of Iceberga. That greeting was excellent, Conrad, Iceberga said, but you seem quite a bit skinnier than before. Have you not been eating enough? She hadn't so much as hesitated to voice what was on both our minds. Inara gave another troubled smile. Lord Conrad has always been a light eater. His appetite seems to have shrunk even more in your absence, Lady Feline, so we decrease his portions accordingly. I am sure he will start eating more now that you can have meals together again. Conrad bobbed his head and added, I want to eat with you, sister. I was so glad to hear that he'd been looking forward to my return. I want to eat with you too, I replied. Let us start having breakfast and dinner together. But what about lunch, he asked, confused. Won't we always be together now? Oh. An indescribable feeling of guilt arose within me. Sorry, Conrad, but from tomorrow onward, I'll be working in the castle like father. I need to go there until 6 bell each day. Remember how I went to the Clarum last year? No, don't go again. That isn't an option. This is an important job for me, I said, surprised to see him on the verge of tears. When Asperger was here with us, it pained me to see him like this, but I couldn't have lied to him and said that we could be together all day every day. Lord Conrad, you mustn't trouble Lady Feline, and Ainera admonished, squeezing his shoulder. You promised to be a good boy, didn't you? And we have a visitor. Conrad looked up with a start, then hung his head. Sorry for being so jealous. Oh, I do not mind, Asperger replied with a kind smile. You just love your sister, that's all. It was then that the servant from earlier returned. It appeared that all of our luggage had been brought inside, which meant it was time to bid Asperger farewell. I thank you ever so much, I said to her. It is because of you that I was able to lead such a comfortable life in the Royal Academy. I hereby conclude your service contract. The greatest reward I could have received was being able to witness your growth with my own eyes. I shall await your call next year as well. Now, if you'll excuse me. Ainera, Conrad, and I watched as Asperger returned to the carriage. It started rolling along once again, and the moment it turned a corner... Ainera's attendant-like smile gave way to a very fierce glare. You are very late returning home, Lady Feline. 6 bell rang long ago. To think you would have wasted even more money on a servant than was necessary. I don't want to hear any such complaints from you, I shot back. The order in which we returned home is dictated by status. More importantly, Conrad, let us eat You were so late returning that Lord Conrad has already eaten. Now I must go bathe him. Use this time to eat on your own. And once she started tugging Conrad away by the arm, if she was bathing him, then she had been probably looking after him all this time. I thank you ever so much, Ainera. I trust you will bathe Conrad properly. Before then, however, I would ask that you help me get changed. The Royal Academy's black uniforms were designed to be put on with the help of one's attendants. In other words, I couldn't take mine off alone. Ainera frowned at my request. Lord Conrad, off to your room. My brother gave me an imploring look. He had no doubt been lonely while I was gone, but he had to go. I didn't want him hanging around while I was getting changed. I hugged him close and said good night. Conrad, may you have Schlaftrum's blessing and a pleasant rest. We will eat breakfast together in the morning. Yes, sister. After giving me an overjoyed smile, Conrad headed off to his room. I was relieved by his obedience as I went to my own room with Ainera. The servant had piled my luggage wherever was convenient, so my room was seemed smaller than usual. As I gazed at some of the wooden boxes out of the corner of my eye, I opened my closet, inside of which were commoner clothes one would put on and remove without assistance. They were everyday outfits I would never wear at the Royal Academy. Lady Jonsara seems to be busy at the moment, I remarked. Has dinner been prepared? Indeed, I must check up on her and cannot serve you your meal, but your food is ready. I see. Tomorrow I need to go to the castle at 2nd bell. I would ask you to help me change again after breakfast. Ainera helped me out of my Royal Academy clothes, her lips pursed in displeasure all the while. As soon as she was done, she practically stormed out of my room. I'm just glad she's actually helping Conrad bathe. I put on my commoner clothes by myself, served my own dinner in the dining hall, and then ate on my own. The food was so plain that the atmosphere was so lonely. I remembered the delicious meals and the lively conversations I'd shared with Lady Rosamund and her retainers at the Royal Academy, and immediately I wanted to return there. After my dinner, I went back to my room. I could hear the crying of a baby coming from somewhere else in the building. Much like Lady Jonsara herself, Ainera had been dedicating almost all of her time to the child since he was born. She only ever did things for Lady Jonsara and my father, so I doubted she would help me put away my things or prepare my bed for me. How long is it going to be before I can sleep? I looked around my room, which had seemingly been neglected the entire time I was away, and sighed. I would need to clean up, change my sheets, and prepare for work tomorrow before I could get any rest. Girls from other families were probably welcomed back by their mothers when they returned home from the Royal Academy, even if their mothers had passed away. I assumed they at least had an attendant preparing their room for them. It really made me wonder how many other nobles changed into commoner clothes immediately upon returning home and weren't able to sleep until they sorted out their own living space. It was so pathetic that I wanted to cry, but I knew painfully well that getting emotional wouldn't achieve anything. So after taking a few deep breaths to calm down, I rolled up my sleeves and went to fetch some cleaning equipment. Okay, I'm going to have to end this off here. Next one will be the last one for this video, for this volume, guys. I'll see you on the next one.